Hello everyone, Donkey Storm here, and today we're going to be looking at the Frost Death Knight spec in Shadowlands. Frost is a funny spec to cover. I feel like there are a ton of changes to talk about, and at the same time, feels like very little will really be changing about the way the spec plays. Frost has always been a very straightforward spec, revolving around Howling Blast, Obliterate, Frost Strike, and your DPS cooldowns to smash things with your icy powers. For lovers of simplicity, don't worry. That's not going to change, and I think its simplicity is really one of the strengths of the spec. Shadowlands will add some new trinkets into your beloved Frost spec, but if you're happy with your Frost DK at the moment, there's no reason to think that's going to change. Likewise, if Frost has never been your bag, there's no reason to think you'll suddenly fall in love with it in Shadowlands. That said, let's get into what's changing for Frost DKs, and as always, if you like the video, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. To see more Shadowlands content covering a variety of specs, please subscribe. First off, Two-Handed Frost is making its triumphant return. This is a much requested change and definitely a fan favorite, but it comes with its own set of issues. Mainly the fact that it will likely be a DPS loss, being able to only use one Runeforge effect instead of two. I'm really hoping that there is some way to make sure this balances out, because I personally think that two-handed weapons just fits the class fantasy of a Death Knight so much better than dual wield. That said, people like doing damage, so if two-hand is not at least equal to dual wield in terms of DPS, it's unlikely you'll see many people using two-handers. Here's hoping that Blizz finds a way to balance the numbers and tune this so that both dual wield and two-handers have a place in the Frost spec. Remains to be seen until we get some sims exactly how those are going to interact with each other. Secondly, we have 5 new Runeforges in addition to the already existing ones. This is a nice thing to see, as DKs have been using the same Runeforges for forever now. We've got Rune of Apocalypse, which gives your ghoul a chance to apply one of 4 debuffs to the target: a healing reduction, damage taken increase, a damage dealt reduction, and a slow and damage over time. The unfortunate thing here being that you can't control which debuff the ghoul gives the target. Sound unimportant to Frost? Well, Frost DKs are getting their ghouls back, so this will be a rune you could at least consider depending on how it sims, but still seems pretty unlikely that this is going to be a go-to for Frost in a PvE setting. Next we've got Rune of Hysteria, which increases runic power by 20, gives a chance to increase runic power generation by 20% for 8 seconds. Pretty self-explanatory resource buff here, and a possibility for the offhand slot. We'll need to see some sims to determine if this can overtake any of the existing options. Also added to the Runeforge is Rune of Sanguination, giving your Death Strike a damage boost depending on your target's missing amount of health. Also, when you fall below 35% health, you heal for 48% of your health over 8 seconds. Don't think we'll be seeing Frost DKs use this one in a PvE setting, but I could see its uses for Blood DKs or possibly PvP tankiness. Next on the Runeforging menu, we've got Rune of Spell Warding, which deflects 3% of all spell damage and has a chance to create a shield that absorbs magic damage equal to 10% of your maximum health. When an enemy damages the shield, their cast speed is reduced by 10% for 6 seconds. Again, this sounds like a pretty specific PvP rune here, but it's nice to have some defensive options for PvP. Finally, for new runes, we've got Rune of Unending Thirst, granting 10% haste and movement speed, and heals you for 5% of your maximum health when you kill an enemy that yields experience or honor. Additionally, it increases your movement speed while dead by 10%. I'm not sure how a flat 10% haste compares with the proccing 15% strength we get from Fallen Crusader, but if it's even close, boy would a lot of DKs love to have that 10% movement speed, with movement being such a weakness of the class. I guess simming will tell us whether or not we get a little movement speed here, or if we're still going to plod along for the sake of our strength buff. So overall, DKs are getting some utility or PvP-focused runes, and a couple of possible PvE contenders with Unending Thirst and Hysteria. I really want Unending Thirst to sim well for the sake of some movement speed, but unfortunately I just don't know if that flat 10% haste is going to outweigh the Fallen Crusader buff. Don't go buying a new pair of running shoes for Shadowlands, DK players. Now on to the Death Knight's unpruned abilities. Abilities that were previously spec specific but now usable by all specs. The following abilities have become baseline for all specs of Death Knight: Death and Decay, Anti-Magic Zone, Lichborn, Raise Dead, and Chains of Ice. Of these, I feel like Anti-Magic Zone, Lichborn, and Raise Dead are the most impactful for Frost DKs. Anti-Magic Zone will add some nice utility in raids and dungeons, something Frost DKs could really benefit from. And Lichborne adds a nice CC break to your kit. Although Frost doesn't have many abilities that interact with your ghoul the way Unholy does, at least you'll be able to sack your pet for some extra health. Overall, Frost DKs benefit fairly well from the addition of unpruned abilities in terms of survivability and utility. Another nice change is that Frostworm's Fury, Frost DK's iconic AoE spell, is now baseline, making room for other choices in the talent tree, which we'll go over next. So let's get into the Frost talent tree. Very little to cover here. With Frostworm's Fury becoming baseline, it gets replaced with Hypothermic Presence, which reduces the runic power cost of your abilities by 35% for 8 seconds. Kind of weird choice here, as this talent ends up in what used to be the AoE row. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some more changes to the Frost DK talent tree as the beta moves ahead, because that is literally the only thing that has changed since BFA. Alright, on to Covenant abilities, our borrowed power for the Shadowlands expansion. You'll get to choose just one of the following abilities depending on which Covenant you choose to align with. First of all, we've got the Kyrian ability, Shackle the Unworthy. Cool name for starters. It reduces the damage the target does to you by 5% and adds an arcane damage dot over the next 14 seconds. It's on a 1-minute cooldown, and while Shackle the Unworthy is active on an enemy, rune spending attacks reduce its cooldown by 4 seconds. That's going to lead to a lot of uptime on this ability. An arcane dot just doesn't seem very frosty or particularly fun or interesting for that matter, so I'm kind of hoping that sims don't lead to this becoming our go-to Covenant ability for Frost DKs. The Vithir Covenant ability, Swarming Mist, creates heavy mist around you for 8 seconds, increasing your dodge chance by 10%. It deals shadows damage every second to enemies within 10 yards, and every time it deals damage you gain 3 runic power up to a maximum of 15. Another 1-minute cooldown ability that will see a lot of uptime. So you've got an AoE Immolate-like ability that regens a small amount of runic power. I'm not sold on this one as it stands right now. The Necrolord ability is called Abomination Limb. Man, DKs always win when it comes to ability names. You sprout an additional limb, get your mind out of the gutter, for 12 seconds. Every second it deals shadow damage to all nearby enemies and pulls an enemy to your location if they're further than 8 yards from you. This one is on a 2-minute cooldown. It sounds pretty interesting. Again, AoE damage that we would have to see how it performs versus Swarming Mist, especially with double the cooldown. I guess the pull-in feature could be kind of a nice bonus as well, but the jury's still out here. Finally, we've got the Night Fae ability, Death's Due. This replaces Death and Decay, which is no loss for Frost DKs as they wouldn't otherwise use the spell anyway. This ability corrupts the targeted ground, causing shadow damage over 10 seconds to targets within the area. Enemies deal 1% reduced damage to you up to a maximum of 15%, and their power is transferred to you as an equal amount of strength. I'm not entirely sure how that transfer of power works, but it's intriguing nonetheless. It could be that as you gain 1% reduced damage, you're gaining 1% strength as well. It also retains the usual Death and Decay combat effects for Death Strike and Scourge Strike. Again, not a Frost thing. So AoE oriented, apparently the amount of power we receive, it's going to depend on the number of enemies within the radius. So it sounds like an AoE spell, which might have some potential. Okay, so having done a number of these videos for a variety of different classes, and go check them out by the way, I'm not really impressed with the DK Covenant abilities yet. I can't really point to any as being an absolute go-to. We'll need to see some sims to determine that information. It feels like the abilities try to balance some aspect of being a tank with some aspect of being a DPS and end up landing in some kind of murky middle ground, but none of them jump up as being super cool, which is a bit of a shame. Good thing there's still some time in the beta. Hopefully we can see some tweaks to these. I want to throw in something else here that applies not to just Death Knights, but just about every class I look at going into Shadowlands. Blizzard, please reverse the GCD back to how it was, for the love of all things. Classes with a lot of frequent use cooldowns like Frost DKs and BM Hunters just feel so clunky at the beginning of an expansion due to our lack of haste, and many players have voiced their frustration over this. Dude, it's just not fun. Okay, with that out of the way, what's left to say about Frost DKs? Not much, honestly. Frost DK is going to continue to be the simplistic, fast-paced spec it has always been, the bit of added utility for 5-man groups, raids, and PvP. Is that a bad thing? Well, that's a matter of opinion. If you were looking for a Frost DK overhaul, it's just not happening. If you already liked Frost and just wanted to see some new wrinkles added in, well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed this video. As always, please subscribe to see more Shadowlands content. It's a free way to show me some support. This has been Donkey Storm, and thanks very much for watching.